Welcome, everyone, to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney. Our goal here is to give you some actionable takeaways that will help you lead your teams. Thanks for joining us on this leadership journey. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I am genuinely thrilled today with the guest we have in the leadership studio, not just because of the powerhouse expertise that he brings, but because I've had the honor of knowing him personally and professionally for a few years now. Bill Bonbrest is with us. He is the founder of Bonbrest Advisory, where he helps leaders in the hospitality industry. Okay, hospitality industry, but it works for all of us, folks. Elevate performance, energize teams, and deliver unforgettable guest experiences. Okay, but that only scratches the surface. Bill has held executive leadership roles across some of the most iconic brands in the hospitality and entertainment industry. So think of the TAO Group, just to name a few. He's led teams through major expansions, brand evolutions, and operational turnarounds, always with clear focus on people, performance, and purpose. Today, through Bonbrest Advisory, he's a trusted partner to executives who want to lead more effectively, build strong cultures, and turn operational excellence into a competitive edge. He's just the kind of leader who doesn't just talk about high standards, guys. He builds the systems, and then trust me, he makes them sustainable. Bill, I am so glad you are here with me today. He's also just a rock star to be around because he brings up everybody's energy in the room. So you are somebody that I look forward to seeing whenever I do, and I just can't get enough of you. So thanks for joining us here on the podcast today, Bill.
Thanks for offering, and it's so nice to be with you, Christine. I love being around you too, and I feel like, you and I are siblings when it comes to focusing on bringing energy and enthusiasm to whatever group we're with, and I recognize that from the very first time I met you, so it's a privilege to be here.
Oh, it's true. Yes. All right. So lots of energy today if you're listening. Here we go. So I just want to give people a little bit of your background because you have such great stories. And we love stories here. We love stories and we love tips on this podcast. So you are the man for both of those things. So just give us a little bit of your brief history of how did you even get into hospitality and kind of the performance improvement space of that?
Sure. My parents divorced when I was 4, and my dad was in the restaurant business. So he lived in Washington, D.C. and stayed in D.C. And my sister and I moved to New York City where my mom was from. And so I would go down on weekends starting when I was 5 years old. And it's crazy to think about now, but I used to take the Eastern shuttle down by myself. And my mom would drop me off at LaGuardia Airport and load me on the airplane, and I'd fly down. And usually my dad's friend, girlfriend of the moment or best friend of the moment would pick me up and take me to whatever restaurant he was running. And so I was validating the guest experience in great restaurants and great bars from the time I was a little kid. And so that's really how I got to learn through osmosis what's important and what makes a great guest experience. And it stuck with me. I was in my 20s. I was a young father, and I only knew how to do the restaurant and nightclub thing. I'd been doing that since I was a teenager. But as I said, I've been around it since I was 4 or 5 years old. So that's how that was my first entree into this world, and I've been in it ever since.
I love it. That is amazing. When you said you were going back to your parents' divorce, I thought we were going in a whole different direction. I thought, wow, we are going deep here. We're jumping right into divorce. But now I see you were immediately in the restaurant experience.
Yeah, but I'll bring it back to my family for a second because it's what's informed me as a leader and as a team member and as somebody who gets to work around a lot of people. At the end of the day, my family stuck together. It was very, even though my parents divorced, it was not uncommon for me to have Thanksgiving dinner with my father, his then girlfriend, my mother, her then husband. And it was, we all stuck together through thick and thin. And I think that modeled for me a certain, loyalty, a certain, love that's informed who I am in the workplace for sure.
Yeah, I can see that. When you say that, I'm like, oh, wow, I never knew that about you. And I can see that immediately. What do you think, like when you think about teams now, right? The guest experience, because I hear you talk about that all the time. And it actually changed when I've heard you talk about it. What I love about it is that term, the guest experience, right? It's not just applicable to restaurants, although very much so, right, in terms of that. But I love that word experience, and like your whole time, because you're not just going for food when you're going for restaurants, you are going for that whole experience. And my experience of being in your restaurants in the past, it was a total experience. So when you go in and you work with teams or philosophies on raising that guest experience, what exactly are you helping them do?
Well, I share with them always my core value, which is something that I learned from Danny Meyer years and years ago. And he writes about it in his great book, Setting the Table. And he says that the guest experience can never exceed the team member's experience. It's like an algebraic equation. So that for me really informs everything that I do and everything that I talk to teams about. Because if we're not doing, the only way to drive a great guest experience, and I don't care if you're in a bar, a restaurant, a hotel, a rooftop, a beach club, or a luxury retail store, the guest, if the only way to impact the guest experience is to have happy, energized, enthusiastic, bought in employees, team members. And so I really believe, I always start with the guest experience if the guest experience is the most important thing to all of us, and that's what really drives sales in the hospitality industry and in so many other industries, whether you call them customers or clients, it doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. At the end of the day, the guest experience can never exceed the team member experience. That is like a very important idea that I not only teach, but I show the clients that I work with how to do that. And that informs great team performance, because that leads to a wider discussion for me with any leadership team about, okay, what are your strengths and what are your blind spots? And then what are your team members' strengths and blind spots? Because at the end of the day, I believe in building complementary teams. A complementary team is where we accentuate each other's strengths and make each other's weaknesses irrelevant. And the only way to do that is to get to know each other and to recognize not only what your strengths and weaknesses are, but what your colleagues and team members' strengths and weaknesses are. So it starts there. That's how I really enter into any organization. I usually work with the CEO and founder and the key executive team. And, in the hospitality industry, that often is, especially in small organizations that have only a few places but are looking to grow, that often is very mom and pop. Like starting with those few core values that I mentioned is really, the guest experience can never exceed the team member's experience. The way to be a complementary team is really to accentuate each other's strengths and make each other's weaknesses irrelevant. The only way to do that is to really look out for one another and care about what happens to the rest of your team members, and realize like that their best interests are your best interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, when you say, I love that you meet with the CEO and the COO or whoever at that founder, whatever at that top level, when you meet with them, is this the kinds of conversations that you're having with them as well? Like, are they usually bought in, or do you have to do a bit of, do you have to convince them?
Well, their focus is usually on KPIs and how to improve the financial performance. And I always bring it back to the people and the team performance, because at the end of the day, the only way to build a strong organization is to develop the people that are closest to the guest experience, whatever that means in terms of your business, and closest to the team member experience. So I take the focus off the executive team a lot of times and focus on the venue level, store level, guest, as close to the guest experience as possible to those people, and developing those people and making sure that those people think like owners, think like the executive team.
How do you get them to, like, what do you do? What's one thing that you do to help that? Because I think everybody has those questions. Like, what are those people that are closest to, I love that, closest to the guest experience? Those are the ones that have the strongest experience of the place. But often there's the biggest gap there, right? Between the people who are the owners and them. How do you do that? Like, what's one thing you do? I know that's the whole thing.
I do a bunch of things, but one thing I do is talk to the executive team about the kind of the higher purpose of their roles, that they are support people. It's my job to work with and for all of them. And it's their job to work with and for all of the venue level leaders or middle level managers who are closest to the transactions, closest to whatever drives their business. In my world, it's the guest experience, but in other businesses, it's all the same. It's really about empowering the people that are the front line. And whether it's, if you study great businesses, this is not unique to the hospitality business. FedEx does the same thing. The great airlines. There was a great guy in the 80s who ran
Southwest, maybe?
No,
No.
Southwest is a great example, but I was thinking of SAS, the Swiss Airlines.
Oh, okay.
And he was a really enlightened CEO and leader, and somebody who I studied early on. And, there's so many good examples. And going back, I have to say, I've been listening a lot to this Founders podcast, which is really about, which is fantastic. I highly recommend it. And, And one of the things that they do well is talk about the biographies, the life of great people in businesses across industry. And there are the stuff that I think about and talk about and work with clients on, work with the people who I'm lucky enough to work with and for, is all the stuff that I hear great leaders talk about. And it's great leaders across industry and in the public service field too, so I think I'm just reading a book right now about World War II in London. And the three Americans who, one was Ed Murrow, the other was Gil Winant, and the third was Averell Harriman. And they were three people. Gil Winant was the ambassador to England then, the U.S. ambassador. Ed Murrow was a famous broadcaster who was broadcasting from London on a nightly basis. And the third person is Averell Harriman, who was in charge of Roosevelt's Lend-Lease program. And they were instrumental in bringing Churchill and Roosevelt together. And what I love about the stories is that all three of them were known for walking through the streets of London as close to the citizens of London who were being bombed on a nightly basis during that time, and actually asking them how they're doing, finding out about what was going on. That kind of management by walking around, leadership by getting in the field and seeing what the guest experience and what the team member experience is like, for me, is one of the first things I do as well.
Yeah. I love that. So when you get in there, you're walking around those restaurants. So you're seeing, do they know who you are? Are you undercover at this point?
No, I introduce myself. I always introduce myself, and I have no problem talking to people. And I'm as curious about walking into the kitchen, which I refer to as the heart of the house. A lot of people say the front of the house and the back of the house in our industry, but I refer to the back of the house as the heart of the house. And I'm often, one of the first places I go is into the kitchen and right up to the dishwasher, who is not used to being addressed by ownership or even by management and by leadership. And yet, what I'm hopefully doing is modeling the behavior that I expect from the venue level leadership by going and acknowledging, appreciating the lowest paid position in the entire venue. And one of the most important, I don't know when the last time you went out and had dirty plates or dirty dishes or dirty flatware. It's not nice, right? So it makes a big difference. That dishwasher makes a big, big difference. And so I think I believe in management by walking around and seeing, and really actually seeing what the places are, what's happening as close to the guest experience and the team member experience as possible.
I love it. I love it. There's so many takeaways that we can take from that. I was just out talking to some businesses this past week in the middle of the country who do all sorts of things, from construction to window installations to, you name it, to making socks, lots of different industries. And all of them got to that point of who is that frontline staff? Do we know them enough? If they're giving our customers or our clients bad first impressions or second impressions or final impressions, our businesses are doomed. But you're right. We don't think of that often. We're thinking of we definitely think of the customer. I think people think of the customer, but we're often not thinking about that first interaction and how powerful that is. Yet we all know when we go to a restaurant, who do we remember? The server. If our dishes are dirty, if the music, whatever it is that's creating that vibe, good or bad, we remember it. So I love that that you talk to the folks above, get them on board with that first, and then you're going right down to the bottom and role modeling that for the other employees is brilliant. Are people pretty honest with you? Like, do people say when you introduce them, do they talk to you about ideas that they have or things that maybe are bumming them out? Have you ever been anywhere? Don't tell us where, but have you ever been anywhere where it's just so much to turn around, even at any point in your career where it was just daunting or where you just thought, oh boy, this is pretty bad?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, being an entrepreneur and having opened a bunch of places over a long period of time and having, my own money invested and being an owner and getting it wrong and going into a location or with a concept that just didn't hit the mark. That's happened. I have had a handful of home runs, which is great. But you don't hit a home run every time you're at bat. And so I've had the experience of failing. And I think that the most important thing about that for me is that I learned, like, we all change at the speed of pain. And so
I love that. Hold on. Everybody hear that? That is a gem that you will hear from Bill Bonbrest. I mean, that is exactly what your brilliance is. We all change at the speed of pain. That is so true. I'm writing that down.
I've had to change a lot and I've had to change course a lot. And I'm not afraid to share those failures or those moments, those decisions that I made that have been where I've been dead wrong with whoever I'm talking to, because I feel like the people who have done that to me, the people who I've been the recipient of great mentorship over 4 decades in the hospitality industry and in life in general. Like, I have a mastermind. I have a lot of people I can go to with any problem, whether it's a problem at work or a problem at home or, problem with myself, and talk to them about it. And so I try to be that person for others. You talked about remembering, we all, like, when we think about a great restaurant experience, we think about the server. And Maya Angelou once said, she wrote, "I've learned that people will forget what you said to them. People will forget what you did to them, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And that is like another idea that I try very hard to impress upon all the people who I work with, because at the end of the day, if we're not doing a great job taking care of the frontline team members whose responsibility it is to take care of the guests, there's just no way to have a great experience. And I work with really talented people who spend a lot of time, money, and energy on creating environments, whether it's a beach club or a rooftop or a nightclub or a restaurant or a small bespoke bar or lounge, where they're investing a lot of money, time, and energy on curating this great guest experience. So then to not focus on the responsibility that all of us have on taking the team and investing in them, developing them, believing in them, that's the biggest hurdle that I come up against. That there is very little charitable assumption with CEOs and executive team members that I work with. Their first go-to is to tell me how they have the wrong COO in place and he's not doing the job or she's not doing the job that they should be doing. I'm like, tell me what they're doing right. Can we focus on that stuff first? Because a lot of times, what my experience in life, and this is true in marriage, this is true in business, this is true as a parent, whatever I focus on is what I get more of. So it's a mindset game. And people just don't recognize, they think that there's a perfect solution to whatever the problem is. There are no perfect solutions. There are no perfect people. And guess what? You're not perfect either, buddy.
That's right, buddy. Do you tell them that?
Yes. Yes. I said, the problem is not your COO. The problem's you and how you're thinking about your COO. Let's work with this person. Let's develop them. Let's understand that they have blind spots, but let's also first understand what their unique abilities are. And if we can get them to work 80% of their time in their unique abilities, then we're doing our job and fulfilling our responsibility as owners and leaders.
Yeah, I love that. Somebody reminded me this week of that idea that they don't have to be, well, I'll give you an example. A leader in the group I was working with said, well, I don't know how to give them positive attention or positive feedback because all I see are the things that they're doing wrong. All I see are the things that I want them to fix, and my money is at stake and I need them to fix these things. And somebody in the room said something I thought so brilliant. It was such a good reminder for me. She said, they don't have to do 100% of the things right. She goes, if you've ever done any sort sort of puppy training, you know this to be the case. The best way to train a puppy is with treats, and you give little tiny treats for anything that they're doing in the right direction. It doesn't even have to be perfect. You don't wait for a puppy to be perfect. You wait for something that's going in the right direction and then treat and then treat and then treat. So they realize like, oh, this is the behavior that is wanted, or this is the kind of culture that we're creating, or this is what it means to be part of this family. And it's associated with positive feedback. And the literature backs it up too. The research all shows that positive attention is so much stronger than all of this, constructive criticism that we think we're supposed to be giving all the time as leaders. And I think you're so right. Is like, if we're focused on that, that's where our energy goes, is to the negative.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean we change our standards. Standards of excellence. Excellence is excellence. Period. Full stop.
Mm-hmm.
However, unless someone is deficient in the areas of integrity or character, or, there's a lot of times, especially in the hospitality industry right now, the workforce is so tight. There's so much need for frontline team members, and that's hourly positions, but also leadership positions, salary positions. And a lot of times when I'm interviewing potential candidate for a leadership position, the first thing that I'm trying to understand is, are they a good person? Because you can make a good person a great leader. Mm-hmm. You cannot make a great leader a good person. And there's no great leader without being a good person in my world, but there are a lot of very effective people in senior leadership position that don't embrace the idea of like continuing to work on their own character and that being the most important thing. And I feel differently. I feel like, and the way that it's really noticeable is, you said, that one of the things that you remember about a great restaurant experience is a great server. You cannot, this is another algebraic equation. You cannot make a great server a good person, but you can make a good person a great server.
True.
Because it's just teaching them fundamental technical skills. The interpersonal skill set is much more valuable and much harder to shape.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. It's funny because I thought I would be a great server. Okay. When I was growing up, I thought I'm going to be a great server. I'm enthusiastic. I'm nice. I like people. And then I went for my first job to work. Well, I had another job, and then I decided I'm going to go where my stepsister works. I won't say the name of the franchise, but it's one of those that there's a million of them, but they serve food, like not fast food, but like, what do they call those middle range kind of restaurants?
Casual.
Yeah. Casual restaurant.
Fast casual dining.
Yeah. In outside of Dallas where I lived. And so I went to work in this restaurant, and exactly what you're talking about did not happen. We were treated horribly. And so you take somebody who I think would have been, if I look at little Christine when she was young, was so enthusiastic and ready to go, had no idea how to serve tables or anything like that. But the way that we were treated, I had to work lunch, because that's what you do when you first start, right? I worked the lunch shifts, which were terrible because you put a stopwatch down on every table as soon as they hit, and if they didn't get lunch in 15 minutes, it was free. Right. And so, but it's so little in the hands of the server, whether that lunch is ready in 15 minutes. Right. But we were responsible for that. So if you didn't get those lunches and the company had to pay for it, some of that money came out of our money. It was so bad. And then it was like, they did this whole thing where kids eat free. So women would come in with 12 kids, I swear, from the neighborhood, and all those kids would eat free. And we're making tiny little cherry sodas by hand, for every single kid. And on one lunch, one $12 lunch, and we're serving all of these kids. And one day I left, I'll never forget it. I ended up, because you had to tip out, all the bus boys and stuff like that. So I lost money on 2 times. I was like, this is terrible. It was horrible. Not only that, it was the 80s. So you were also sexually harassed and everything else.
Yeah. And by the way, that's totally illegal. You can't make a frontline team member pay for a mistake like that. Ridiculous.
It was terrible. I mean, this was back in the day, but it was horrible. I mean, I literally was like this. So talk about taking somebody who was ready. And then I thought for the rest of my life, I'm terrible at waiting tables. I can't do that job. But now when I'm hearing you talk, I think in a totally different environment, I could have actually been quite good at it. You're giving me hope, Bill.
You would have been great. I would have made you a superstar. And a lot of it is just, the ability to recognize people's strengths and natural talents, and then there are blind spots. Like, I have plenty of blind spots. I'm not a super admin person. I never have been, even though I've run huge organizations at the COO level. It's not my forte, and yet I'm okay with that, because if, again, I have other natural talents, and they are in the areas of recognizing talent, developing people, empowering people to kind of help lift people up, all those things. And I've gotten a lot of great performance and a lot of great financial rewards as a result of that. So I'm not afraid to look for people, team members, and surround myself with them who are very strong at those things that I'm not good at. Like, I've always been good at surrounding myself with people who have great organizational skill sets, are very admin savvy, like actually like to do those things. And that's a good person for me. That's the idea of a complementary team, is where we accentuate each other's strengths and make each other's weaknesses irrelevant. And if you can instill that, rather, because I come from a place of growing up in business where it was important to prove how smart and how good I was at everything. That's not realistic. I now
Mm-hmm.
know that I'm exceptionally talented at a few things, a very few things, very few. But those things that I'm good at, I'm great at. And
Yeah.
I have to be willing to be bad at everything else in order
Mm.
in service of being great at a few things.
Love it. I mean, we talk about that all the time, but I've never heard it said that way, that you have to be bad at a few things in order to be in service of the great ones. That is a great spin on that. That's so true. So true. I love it. Now, we always like to talk on this podcast. We always try to give people some actionable tips that they can try in their businesses, right? We have a lot of people who are at manager level that listen, and a lot of folks that want to implement some of these ideas. Are there any little actionable tips that you could think of? For instance, when you're working with your frontline staff, try doing this or try this.
Yeah, sure. Number one, like, meet with people, like
Mm,
face to face, even if it's 5 minutes, as soon after the behavior as possible. The behavior could be a substandard behavior, it could be an extraordinary behavior, and I like to follow the rule of making sure that I praise in public and I criticize not in private, but one on one. Doesn't have to
mm.
be private. And I'll give you an example. When I was a general manager back in a long time ago, and I was responsible for a large team, and it was in Times Square area. It was a very high volume restaurant, landmark place, and there was a huge crew. And I would often not work the closing shift as general manager because I had to be into the office early in the morning. So I'd often, be scheduled until whatever, 11 o'clock at night. And it was my practice to keep these 3x5 card in my shirt pocket and write down a few examples of either substandard performance that I witnessed or extraordinary performance that I witnessed. And the wins, I would often just call it out in front of everybody in the bread station, telling the busboy, hey, this bread station looks so good right now. And really call attention to it. But I also had like 3 or 4 notes on 3 or 4 examples of a server not interacting in a way that was representative of gracious hospitality, or a host being curt with someone on the phone that I overheard. And I made it my business to, at the end of that shift, even if I was clocked out, technically, to stick around and meet with those team members one-on-one. When I would sit with people at the end of the night and talk to them about substandard performance during a shift, I would always make sure that it was short to the point and that it wasn't about them as a person. I wasn't criticizing them as a person. I was criticizing the behavior that they was displaying that was substandard. And I was explaining what excellence looked like, and making sure that I asked them at the end of the conversation, are you clear about what my expectations are going forward? People knew where they stood with me all the time. And that's one thing that I coach, because too often it's like an electronic message at the end of the night, sending an email, sending a text,
Mm.
not holding on to that knowledge that somebody did something that was substandard and not giving them the opportunity to respond to it by just not saying it, but then blowing up on something later on. So my biggest direction to all the people who I work with who are on the front lines is like, talk to one another. Make sure that you have those face-to-face interactions. The art of conversation is really important, and having a rapport and an ongoing conversation about how someone's working is key. That's a big one for me.
I love that. You just reminded me of something that I haven't thought about in years, and I'm just going to add it on because I think it relates to your work, but I was an actor for years, and you reminded me of something, is that at the end of every rehearsal, right? Once you get in the space and you're running the show. So the show is, you're running the show, you're seeing how things go, you're working out the kinks. You sit down at the end and the director gives notes. And the whole staff is sitting there. And I guess I thought of this because so many actors work in the restaurant business, right, as servers. But we're used to that time of director's notes. But you're right, they're quick. And if the director has something where you really have substandard performance, so to speak, or there's something really wrong with what you're doing, the director isn't bringing that up in front of everybody. That's a separate conversation, right? That's much deeper. But for the most part, we are getting quick, actionable things to do, both positive and adjustments that need to be made in front of everyone, because we're also learning from those moments that everybody else is getting. So it might be like a note like, hey, Bill, I need you to pick up your pace on these cues. Those cues are lagging. There's too much pause between the cues there. That's a note for maybe Bill, who's in the cast, but that's one for all of us to hear. Oh, that's important to this director. Oh yeah, we don't want this show to seem longer or have a longer running time. So even though that's Bill's note, that's really all of our notes, right? Addition to like, oh, that was great when you hit that mark there, or that was a great repartee you two had, that we can then learn those positive things from each other too. So I hadn't thought of it that way in terms of giving feedback. One, I love your tip, but it's very actionable, is that it's quick, and that it's somewhat public if it's that type of feedback. And you're not going on, and it's not excruciatingly embarrassing for them, right? People can be treated as we get it. We're professionals. We can take a note. But I love that you separate if there's a bigger issue, because you want your standards to stay high. You don't want something to suffer. That's great. You just reminded me of that.
The biggest separation is between the person and the behavior. You manage and coach behavior and performance, not personality, attitude, character. That's not what you're doing. And so I think that's also that helps me a lot, because then it's more palatable for whoever I'm giving feedback to.
Yes. Like, haven't you heard people give terrible feedback of like, your attitude sucks, or you got to pick up your attitude? People have no idea what to do with that.
Yeah, they don't know what they don't know what you're talking about. They feel attacked. I'm somebody who wants validation, wants reinforcement, positive acknowledgement. I thrive on that. So I try to give what I want to get, Bring what you want to get.
There you go. Well, gosh, they must love seeing you coming through that restaurant. I'm sure you're just a burst of energy. I think that's the other piece, is that when I know you, and one tip that I would say to people from watching you is that when you're in that space, you bring focus, attention, and energy to that room. People then rise to the occasion. It doesn't mean it doesn't have to come with coaching and high standards, like you said, but I think the way you're giving feedback is very in service, in love. Like, I bring this with love.
Yeah. All you need is love, Christine.
All you need is love. Well, on that note, Bill, thank you so much for getting in touch with us. If you guys want to increase your guest experience, no matter who your guests are, Bill is a great person to bring on board. Bonbrest Advisory is his company now. And boy, he has a wealth of stories and knowledge, and where he's working on a book. We're trying to get him to get that book out there, because it's going to be a good one when it comes. But you heard him here. So Bill, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Christine. It's great seeing you.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you get anything out of this, please follow us. And if you enjoy it, please take a moment to rate us or write a comment. It will mean the world to us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you just can't get enough, follow me on TikTok and check out tlpnyc.com/podcast for more information.